Elijah Turner's cabin's weathered logs were covered in golden striations as the morning sun shone through the tall pines. He stood on the porch, coffee in hand, breathing in the crisp mountain air and listening to the distant call of a hawk. He had purchased the property as a place to escape the city, a haven where he could hike, and finally find some peace. A dream come true for a man who had grown up surrounded by concrete and noise. The cabin was situated on a parcel of land that he had purchased after years of saving. In the past few weeks, Elijah had fixed the place, patched the roof, cleared brush, and brought supplies from closest town, about 40 minutes away along a winding dirt road. He had met a few neighbors, most of whom were friendly, as well as a couple of old-timers who had given him advice about bears and snow tires. However, he had also heard rumors about the Neighborhood Homeowners Association, HOA, a group that seemed to be in control of everything, even up the mountain. He hadn't given it much thought until one day, when a woman in a tailored suit emerged from a silver SUV with a clipboard in her hand and a determined expression. Dust was swirling behind the vehicle. She introduced herself as Linda Cartwright, president of the Pine Ridge Mountain HOA, and wasted no time launching into a list of concerns. She rattled off alleged infractions, including an unapproved fire pit, a shed that didn't fit the community aesthetic, and most absurdly, the color of his front door. Elijah listened politely. As calmly as he could, he said that his property wasn't under the HOA's control, that he had checked the maps and the deed before buying, and that he didn't plan to join any association. Linda's smile tightened. She then quickly climbed back into her SUV and said, "We'll see about that." Because he figured she'd move on to easier targets, Elijah ignored it. However, the visits increased over the following week. Linda came back, accompanied by 2 board members, and demanded that they inspect his property. She threatened legal action and fines when Elijah refused. He showed her the deed once more, pointing out the obvious lines of property, but she refused, insisting that the HOA had historical rights to the entire mountain. In case of emergency, Elijah began storing each correspondence, notice, and interaction in a folder. Then, one afternoon, while he was stacking firewood, he heard tires crunching on the gravel. When he looked up, he saw Linda following 3 sheriff's deputies out of their cruisers, her finger already pointed in accusation. "That's him, officer," she called, and the trees heard her voice. "He is trespassing on HOA property. The entire mountain is mine." Faces were hard to read as the deputies approached with their hands on their belts. After wiping his hands and putting down his axe, Elijah gave them a calm he didn't quite feel. "Good morning, agents. Can I assist you?" Nodded. The lead deputy, a tall man whose face was sunburned. "We received a call regarding a property dispute. Would you mind showing us the paperwork?" After giving a nod, Elijah went inside the cabin to retrieve the folder. Stamped and notarized, he handed over the purchase agreement, survey maps, and deed. The deputy studied them for a long moment, then looked at Linda. "Ma'am, everything seems to be in order. Mr. Turner is the sole owner of this parcel. The county records match." Linda's complexion turned red. "That can't be true. This land has always been managed by the HOA. He must leave because he is breaking the rules." The deputy shook his head. "The HOA lacks authority in this area. You will need to take your issue to civil court if you have one. But for now, Mr. Turner is within his rights." The deputies were already turning away when Linda sputtered, and one of them gave Elijah a sympathetic shrug. As the cruisers pulled out, Linda lingered, glaring at Elijah. She hissed, "This isn't finished." His chest tightened with rage and disbelief as he watched her leave. Although he had dealt with bureaucracy before, she had never been as obstinate or so convinced of her own power. He was aware that this was only the beginning. Elijah sat on his porch and stared at the mountains while drinking his coffee as the sun set behind the mountains. He was staying where he was. This was his home, and he was ready for whatever came next. Elijah's days after Linda's dramatic visit were strange mixtures of calm and tension, although the mountain remained serene and beautiful. With the sun illuminating the forest floor and the wind whispering through the pines, his nerves were now tense at the mere mention of tires on gravel or distant voices. He tried to focus on his projects, repairing the old stone chimney, splitting logs for winter, and hiking the trails that wound through his land, but the sense of being watched was hard to shake. It wasn't just fear. He saw Linda's SUV parked at the edge of his property twice, and discovered fresh tire tracks near the creek that marked the boundary. Even when he was at home, he started locking the cabin door, and he charged his phone so that he could record any more fights. A steady stream of aggressive HOA letters were delivered in the mail. One of them said he was using unauthorized land. Another said he would have to pay daily fees for non-compliance with community standards. And a third said the HOA would pursue all legal remedies to protect the integrity of Pine Ridge Mountain. With copies of his deed and the official county map attached, Elijah reminded them that his property was not subject to their rules in a polite but firm letter. Additionally, he contacted Carla, a straightforward attorney who specialized in property disputes. Carla reviewed his documents and assured him he was in the right, but she also warned him to expect more trouble. People like this don't back down easily, she said. Write down everything. Call the sheriff if they trespass. If they try to fine you, let me know, and don't let them intimidate you. After listening to her, Elijah installed a few trail cameras and meticulously recorded each incident. The next escalation came on a Saturday morning, just as Elijah was enjoying a rare moment of relaxation with a book on the porch. He heard angry, insistent voices and looked up to see Linda leading two men carrying clipboards and HOA badges up the path. Linda said, "We're here to conduct an inspection," without bothering to say hello. "In accordance with the HOA's bylaws, you are required to grant us access." Elijah got up and put his book down. "This is not HOA land. You are not in charge of this. Please depart." Elijah prevented one of the men, a muscular man with a mustache, from getting by. "I'll report you to the sheriff for trespassing if you enter my porch." Linda's eyes narrowed. "You're making a mistake. We can make things very difficult for you." Elijah met her gaze, unflinching. "I'm not afraid of bullies. Please leave my property now." The standoff lasted a few tense seconds before Linda turned on her heel, muttering threats as she led her entourage back to the SUV. While his heart raced as he watched them leave, Elijah insisted that they not experience any fear. He contacted Carla, who advised him to send a cease and desist letter to the HOA and to file a formal complaint of trespassing. That afternoon, Elijah drove into town to meet with the sheriff, who listened sympathetically and promised to keep an eye on things. The sheriff stated, "You're not the first to have trouble with that HOA. However, you were the first to confront them with such force. If they come back, call us right away." Before making his way back up the mountain, Elijah thanked him and purchased a few supplies. He thought about how quickly his dream of peace had turned into a fight for his rights that night as he sat by the fire. He thought about his parents, who had taught him to stand his ground, and about all the people who never got a fair shot because someone with power decided they didn't belong. He wasn't just fighting for his cabin now. He was fighting for the principle that everyone deserved respect, no matter where they came from or what they looked like. The following week brought more of the same, including letters, threats, and occasionally Linda or her board members driving by. But Elijah also started to notice something else. A few neighbors, people he'd only met in passing, began to stop by. Some brought baked goods or firewood. Others just wanted to chat. One older couple, the Harrisons, told him they'd lived on the mountain for 30 years and had seen the HOA try to push out more than one outsider. "Don't let them scare you off, Mrs." Harrison said, pressing a jar of homemade jam into his hands. "This place needs people like you." Elijah's resolve was bolstered by their kindness. His porch quickly became a quiet gathering place for support and solidarity after he invited a few neighbors over for coffee. The mountain, it seemed, was full of people who were tired of Linda's reign, and Elijah's stand was giving them hope. However, he was aware that the conflict was not over. Elijah was determined to protect his home and dignity at any cost. So he prepared for whatever the HOA might try next as autumn got darker and the mountain started to show signs of snow. The first snow of the season arrived early, blanketing the mountain in a hush that made the world feel new and untouched. But beneath the peaceful white, the tension between Elijah and the HOA only grew sharper. Linda's campaign escalated from letters and threats to outright harassment. One morning, Elijah awoke to find a bright orange violation notice nailed to his front door, accusing him of illegal occupancy, and demanding he vacate the property within 72 hours. The notice was signed by Linda herself, with a copy taped to his mailbox and another left on the windshield of his truck. Elijah took pictures, added them to his growing file, and called Carla. Carla assured Elijah that the notice was pointless and that it was also a sign that Linda was getting desperate. Carla stated, "She's trying to scare you into leaving. However, she is now in violation of the law. If necessary, we will file a harassment complaint and obtain a restraining order." Elijah drove into town that afternoon to make a formal complaint, and the sheriff promised to send a deputy up every few days to check on him. The support from the local authorities was reassuring, but Elijah still felt the weight of being targeted, of knowing that someone was willing to go to such lengths just to prove a point. Elijah was chopping behind the cabin on a Sunday when the next confrontation occurred. He heard the crunch of tires and turned to see Linda's SUV, this time with a camera crew in tow. She started yelling about community standards and protecting property values as a cameraman was filming her on the porch. Elijah, tired and sweaty, refused to be lured and simply stood his ground. "Linda, you're breaking the law. If you don't leave now, I'll call the sheriff." The cameraman hesitated, but Linda urged him on, demanding that Elijah explain himself to the community. Elijah calmly held up his deed and the county map, stating for the camera that he was a legal owner and that the HOA had no authority over his land. When Linda posted the video online, it backfired spectacularly as a smear campaign. Instead of support, the comments flooded in with outrage at her behavior and praise for Elijah's composure. The story spread, and soon local news picked it up, interviewing Elijah about his experience and shining a light on the HOA's overreach. The attention resulted in increased support from neighbors and even strangers, some of whom recounted their own experiences with HOA abuse. People who felt bullied or silenced gathered on Elijah's porch, and he found himself at the center of a growing movement for fairness and respect. But Linda was not finished. She filed a lawsuit in small claims court, alleging that Elijah's presence was damaging the character of the community and seeking thousands in fines. Carla filed a countersuit for harassment and defamation in response, and the matter quickly became the county's topic of conversation. The judge patiently listened to Linda's rants about her ownership of the mountain during the hearing, waiving maps and bylaws that had no legal standing. Carla gave the deed of Elijah, official record from the county, and a lot of evidence about Linda's harassment campaign. The judge warned Linda that further legal action could result in sanctions against the HOA and dismissed her claims with prejudice. Elijah won not just the case, but the respect of the community, many of whom began to question why they had allowed Linda so much power for so long. Although Elijah was aware that the battle had changed him, the victory was sweet. He was no longer just a man seeking peace in the mountains. He was a symbol of resistance, of standing up for what was right even when it would have been easier to walk away. Elijah found solace in the still beauty of the land, the friendships he had made, and the knowledge that he had triumphed over a bully as winter grew colder. The mountain, once a place of solitude, had become a true home, and Elijah was determined to protect it, and the people who called it home, for as long as he could. Spring arrived on the mountain in a riot of color, wildflowers blooming along the trails, and the air filled with the scent of pine and new grass. But for Elijah, the change in season brought not just renewal, but a sense of hard-won peace. The legal battles with Linda and the HOA had left scars on his nerves, on his time, and on the community itself. But they had also sparked a transformation. The HOA board called an emergency meeting after Linda lost in court, and the judge gave a strong warning. For the first time in years, residents who had felt powerless or ignored showed up in large numbers. Stories were shared of fines for wildflowers, threats over porch swings, and the constant pressure to conform to rules that seemed to change on a whim. Elijah, invited to speak, told his story simply: how he'd come to the mountain for peace, how he'd been targeted for standing his ground, and how he'd found unexpected allies and neighbors who were tired of living in fear. The board, facing a wave of criticism and a petition for new leadership, voted to remove Linda as president. The community was relieved, even though her resignation was swift and bitter. The new board, led by a retired teacher named Mrs. Alvarez, reached out to Elijah and others who had been harassed, promising transparency, fairness, and a return to the original spirit of the mountain, a place where people looked out for each other, not over their shoulders. Elijah was asked to join a new committee focused on community relations, and though he hesitated at first, he agreed, wanting to help ensure that no one else would have to fight the battles he had. The change was immediate. Neighbors who had once kept their distance now stopped by to chat, bringing baked goods, seedlings of garden, or just a friendly word. The porch that had been a fortress became a gathering place, and Elijah found himself hosting barbecues, game nights, and even a book club. Elijah felt a deeper sense of belonging than anything he had experienced in the city as the mountain, once divided by suspicion and fear, began to reunite. He spent his days working on the cabin, hiking the trails, and writing his memoir at Carla's suggestion about the fight for his home and the lessons learned about courage, community, and the quiet power of standing your ground. The story, when published, resonated far beyond the mountain, drawing letters from people across the country who would face their own battles with HOA's bullies or the feeling of not belonging. Every letter was answered by Elijah, who sometimes just listened and offered advice, support, and encouragement. As the years passed, the cabin became a symbol of hope and resilience, a place where newcomers were welcomed and old-timers remembered what it meant to be neighbors. Elijah never forgot the fear and frustration of those first months, but he also never forgot the kindness that helped him through. The Harrisons' jam, the sheriff's steady support, Carla's fierce advocacy, and the quiet strength he'd found in himself. On the anniversary of his first spring on the mountain, Elijah stood on the porch, looking out over the land he'd fought so hard to keep, and felt a deep, abiding peace. The mountain was his home, not because he owned it on paper, but because he had earned his place in the hearts of those who shared it. And as the sun set behind the peaks, casting long shadows through the pines, Elijah knew that no matter what challenges came next, he would face them with the same resolve, the same hope, and the same unshakable belief that everyone deserves a place to call their own.